I don't know how it happened, but it all started with an ordinary meeting. Of course, Marina and I had been a family for 10 years, and it seemed that our life was as solid as a concrete foundation. But as it turned out, behind this solid facade hid cracks that I didn't even realize. I wonder when exactly she began to see me not as a husband, but just a part of the interior? When did it become obvious? Probably when she suddenly started spending more time on her phone than with me. Okay, I'm not a jealous person, and I'm not the type to poke around in my wife's personal space checking her text messages. However, when you're in the same room and the person across from you is completely immersed in a screen, you can't help but start to wonder. One evening, while I was watching TV as usual, and Marina was sitting with the phone, something pricked me. Something inside stirred, and for the first time I felt a strange uneasiness. You know, that feeling when you seem to know everything about your partner, but something starts to feel wrong. I had a suspicion in my head that something was wrong. I decided not to jump to conclusions, gave myself an attitude of not giving in to paranoia, because it could be just a figment of my imaginary jealousy. However, I began to notice little things that I had previously ignored. She was spending more time out of the house, going out with her friends, which were supposedly planned in advance. And I stayed home like a watchman on duty, convincing myself that everything was normal. But you know, sooner or later the truth comes out, like a splinter that won't let you rest. And then one day I heard her talking on the phone. Marina thought I was asleep, and I, lying with my eyes closed, trying not to breathe too loudly to avoid giving myself away. Her voice was quiet, muffled, and all I heard was the name of some Sergey. At first I thought it was just a coworker or an old friend, but the intonation of her voice excited me. There was something too personal. The next day, I noticed that she began to watch her appearance more than ever. She had always been what you might call a well-groomed woman, but now, those frequent visits to the beautician, the closet that was becoming more and more provocative every day, and of course, the new perfume. You wouldn't believe how such small details can work like tiny cogs in a mechanism of suspicion. I still couldn't make up my mind to go for a straight talk. There were two different people fighting inside me, one who was trying to put it down to his own insecurities and fear of losing his wife, and the other who already thought he'd lost her long ago. And worst of all, both were right. For days I lived in this suspended state, as if I were standing on the edge of a cliff, and every action of hers added to the certainty that something was going wrong. I began to pay attention to her every move, to her intonations, to the way she was smiling at me now, as if she knew something I didn't understand yet. You know when you realize that someone is hiding something, but you can't prove it yourself? That feeling used to drive me crazy. One day, I made up my mind. I thought I could talk to her calmly, without emotion, just to ask her what was going on. But as soon as I started talking, she abruptly cut me off. "Are you starting again?" she said, as if our conversation was a replay of some previous events that I didn't remember. Her tone was irritated, and there wasn't a shadow of guilt on her face. I was confused. I expected to see confusion, fear of exposure, and all I got was indifference and contempt. "Nothing is happening," she said it as if mechanically, with a note of boredom. And that's when I realized that she didn't care anymore. She didn't even try to hide her indifference to our relationship. That was probably the most offensive, not that she could cheat on me, but that she didn't care that I noticed it. And then I felt ashamed of myself. For all the years I'd been pulling our marriage together, believing that we were a team, that I was doing everything right. I'd held down the house, the job, been her support while she found herself. Now I realized, she had found herself a long time ago, but it wasn't me. Days passed, and I began to pay more attention to details that I had previously considered unimportant. Marina stayed at work longer than usual, although she always claimed that she was just bogged down with business. The phone calls and messages she now received became much more frequent, and I noticed that she was quick to dismiss them as soon as I appeared nearby. It was like a hidden game of hide and seek in which I was the only one playing by the rules. One evening, after another of her friend sessions, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to do an experiment to see if she was really there. I took a cab and followed the route she always said she'd take. What's the point? After all, it's better to know the truth, even if it's bitter, than to torture yourself endlessly with suspicion. But as you can guess, she wasn't there. No girlfriends, no meetings. Just silence and an empty road. That was the point of no return for me. My suspicions were confirmed. I felt like a complete idiot. It seemed like she was playing some kind of evil game where I was the main fool who didn't even realize that his role was just to be a puppet. Well, I wasn't going to stay in that role. Something inside me broke. Deep down inside, I realized, it was time to act. After that night, I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. We were still living under the same roof, but something had changed in my mind. I was no longer trying to justify her behavior, no longer asking myself, why, questions. I was now focused on something else, how to put an end to this story. Sometimes people say that revenge is not the answer, that it destroys not only the one who is targeted, but also the one who takes revenge. They may be right. But at that moment, I didn't care about those lofty thoughts. I just wanted justice. I wanted her to realize that her lies and cheating would not go without consequences. But how to do that? Hundreds of scenarios were swirling around in my head, and each one seemed too soft. I wasn't someone who could just say everything and walk away, slamming the door. No, I wanted her to feel the same pain I felt. And that was the first step to the plan. For the first few days after my discovery, I kept quiet. I was the perfect husband for her, calm, reserved, always willing to help and support. She didn't seem to notice the change, and that gave me extra strength. I knew her end was near, but she continued to live in her world, thinking she was in control. However, one evening when she went to her friends, as usual, I decided to take action. The plan was simple but effective. I started collecting evidence. No fights, tantrums or accusations, just facts. Cameras, phone calls, records. If she was going to ruin our lives, I intended to do it on her terms. Marina still didn't suspect a thing. She continued her dual existence, and in the meantime, I prepared myself. I began to socialize more with her friends without her knowing it. And you know what's interesting? They started sharing stories with me themselves, not even realizing they were revealing to me the very details I was trying to figure out. The puzzle began to take shape. I soon learned that Sergey wasn't just her coworker. They had been together for about a year. A year? For a whole damn year she'd been lying to my face. Do you know what it feels like to realize that everything you believed in was an illusion? My patience was wearing thin. Now I wasn't just gonna expose her, I wanted it to be a show. I wanted everyone to see her for who she really was. And then the day came when I finally decided to play the final scene. I had everything, screenshots of her texts, photos, phone records. I prepared everything so that it would be as humiliating for her as possible, but without breaking the law, I made sure everything was by the book. I wasn't going to play dirty, but I planned to do it in such a way that the pain she experienced would stay with her forever. X day had come. I knew that she would be heading out again that evening to meet her friends, and actually to her Sergeys. I decided not to miss the moment. This time I prepared thoroughly. I rented a restaurant where we were supposedly to spend our 10-year anniversary. The surprise was ready. I invited all her friends, the very ones who didn't know they had betrayed her long ago. It was going to be a real show with her at the center. Before she suspected anything, I'd worked out a scenario for the evening. The whole dinner was supposed to look like a normal celebration, glasses of champagne, beautiful words, romance. But at some point I was going to include prepared materials, photos, messages, videos. All the things that were going to blow her world up. And so, we sat at the table, glasses clinking, laughter and toasts. Marina was in her repertoire, she was smiling, playing the role of the perfect wife. No one would have guessed that a completely different scenario awaited her. I too held on, didn't show any emotion, though everything was boiling inside me. At some point I raised my glass and said, "Marina, dear, to us. To our 10 years together. You know, I wanted to surprise you, to show you how much you mean to me, and what a way we have traveled together. But before I do, I have a little gift for you. I'm sure it will surprise you." She smiled, but I could see her eyes rounded slightly with anticipation. The thought that something was going wrong may have already flashed through my mind. I plugged the flash drive into the projector, and the pictures of her and Sergey appeared on the screen in front of everyone. The very pictures she never expected to see on the big screen surrounded by her friends. Silence. Absolute, sepulchral silence. Her friends froze with glasses in their hands, Marina too. Her face turned white, she opened her mouth, trying to say something, but the words stuck in her throat. I savored the moment. It was the culmination of what I had been working for all these weeks. But I wasn't going to stop. Did you think I was stupid? That I could be so easily led around by my nose? For a year, Marina, for a whole year you've been lying to my face. My voice sounded steady, but there was steel in it. This is your holiday, you can enjoy every second of it. She jumped up, trying to say something, but I wasn't listening. I did everything I could to make it clear to her that there was no turning back. This night was going to be a living hell for her, and I wasn't going to step in to stop the show. Let her deal with what she'd done. In that moment, as her world was crumbling, I felt like justice had finally been served. She tried to mumble something, to justify herself, but every word she said sounded like an empty sound, utterly meaningless. Her friends looked at her with bewilderment, and some even with pity. Surprisingly, no one rushed to support her. Apparently, everyone already realized that her mask of an ideal wife was just an illusion, which she skillfully maintained for years. Marina tried to leave, to run out of the restaurant, but I blocked her way, holding her hand. No, I wasn't going to give her a chance to escape so easily. Wait, Marina, that's not all, I said, holding back my anger. Do you think this evening is the worst thing that could have happened? No, darling, it's just the beginning. I walked over to the table and pulled out the papers. They were divorce papers. I'd prepared everything a long time ago, realizing that after tonight, there would be no future for us. There hadn't been one in a long time, I just didn't want to admit it. I want you to sign them right now. 10 years of lies, humiliation, betrayal. I am not going to take it another day. I put the papers in front of her and held out a pen. She looked at me with a hatred she seemed to have been holding back for a long time. There wasn't an ounce of regret in her eyes, only anger. Maybe she thought I would give up or forgive her like so many people do? But I wasn't like that. I knew the only way out for both of us was to cut all ties. You can't do that, she finally said, clenching her fists. You don't know what you're talking about. We're family. I grinned. Family? She only thought of family when her world was falling apart. And where was family when she was out with Sergey? Where was family when she lied to me every day? Family, you say? You lost the right to call us that the moment you stopped being honest. It's over, Marina. Just sign it. Her hands were shaking, but I saw her take the pen. Perhaps in that moment she realized that I was no longer who she thought I was. She had always seen me as just a convenient husband who would put up with her cheating and lies. But I was stronger than she thought. And it broke her. She signed the papers, and in that moment I felt a strange release. It was like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders that I'd been carrying around all these years. I no longer felt any pain or resentment, only satisfaction that this chapter of my life had come to an end. But that wasn't all. Before I left, I turned around and said, I'm leaving tomorrow. And you can stay here, in this world of lies that you have created for yourself. Live with it. With him and with what you've lost. I walked away, leaving her amidst the dazed guests and the ruined party she'd worked so hard to build. Her life was no longer in my hands. I let her go. But most importantly, I let myself go. I woke up the next day with an amazing sense of lightness. It was strange and new to me. Could it really be possible to shed years of tension and deception so quickly? I didn't even expect to feel so free. There was no anger or regret, only the realization that I had finally made the right choice for myself. I packed my things, for I was really going to leave. I had a plan, a fresh start. Sure, it sounds like a cliché, but after what I'd been through, I really needed that chance. A chance to be alone with myself, to sort out my thoughts and finally do something I'd wanted to do for a long time, but had never dared to do because of family obligations. I left Marina no note, no parting words. Everything that needed to be said, I had already said. We had severed our ties and now each of us had to move on. She was in the past, and I was on the threshold of a new life. The unknown and utter chaos was ahead of me, but for the first time in a long time it didn't scare me. I chose a small town on the coast where no one knew me. I wanted something quiet, far away from all the hustle and bustle that had permeated my life in recent years. No one was waiting for me, no one knew my story. And it was beautiful. Here I could be anyone I wanted to be, start from scratch. It wasn't easy at first, of course. You know, change is always hard. Lonely evenings, when no one calls, writes, waits at home, it takes some getting used to. But with each passing day, I could feel the pain slowly letting go. I no longer needed to play games, to hide my emotions, to be someone I had long ago stopped being. As the months passed, I began to find new meaning in this solitude. I started doing things I had always enjoyed but never had time for. Writing books, walking along the coast, enjoying nature. You see, sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. And then one day, sitting in a small cafe, I met her, a girl who, strangely enough, reminded me that life can be easy and simple. There was no drama, no pretense. We just got to know each other, had coffee, talked. It turned out that she, too, had recently gone through a painful breakup, and we somehow found common ground right away. Her name was Anna. She had such bright, warm eyes, and she always laughed when I told her some of my silly stories. We started dating. There were no expectations, no promises. Just two people who found solace in each other after the storms they'd been through. And with each passing day, I realized that maybe this was what I needed. No loud words of love, no promises for the rest of my life. Just life as it is, with its joys and small moments of happiness. Marina? I didn't think about her anymore. She remained in the past, in that shattered world I'd left behind. Sometimes it seemed to me that she had never been real, that it had all been some strange dream. Or maybe I'd just learned to let go. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. Life in the new city gradually took on a rhythm. Every day was filled with simple, but so important moments. Walks along the promenade, conversations with Anna, morning jogs along the sea, all this gave me what I had been missing for many years, peace and the feeling that I was really living for myself. Anna turned out to be unlike any woman I had ever been with. She was open, honest, and always spoke straightforwardly. In her presence, you didn't have to pretend, play roles, or fear being betrayed. Every gesture she made, every look in her eyes, it was all real. And that was a real revelation to me. We spent a lot of time together, but we didn't commit to anything. We both realized that now it was important just to be near each other, to enjoy the moment, without planning the future. However, the more I got to know Anna, the more I realized that I wanted her to be a part of my life. One evening, as we sat on the beach, warming ourselves by the fire, I suddenly caught myself thinking that for the first time in years I felt truly happy. It was as if all the shadows of the past had finally dissipated. I looked at her and asked, "Did you ever think you could be this free?" Anna grinned and nodded. I think freedom is not the absence of obligations, but the ability to be yourself. When you don't have to pretend, when you don't have to please anyone, you just live and enjoy the moment. Her words echoed in my head. It was exactly the answer I'd been looking for all these months. I realized that Marina had never given me that kind of freedom. She was always trying to control, manipulate, make me play by her rules. With Anna it was different, I was myself, and that was enough. We sat in silence, listening to the waves crashing against the shore. And in that moment I realized that everything that had happened had led me to this moment. All the suffering, the pain, the betrayal, it was all necessary for me to finally find what I had been looking for all my life. But one day, the phone rang. I wasn't expecting any calls, and there were no particularly sociable people around me. A familiar name popped up on the screen, Marina. She hadn't called me since the day I left. My heart sank for a moment, but then I pressed the disconnect button. No talking, no trying to get back to something that had long since died. But the call came again. This time I picked up the phone. She was silent for a few seconds, as if she couldn't make up her mind to speak. I pictured her face, tense, confused. And only then did I hear her voice. I don't know why I'm calling. I just needed to hear from you. It was a strange sensation, hearing her voice after so many months of silence. I'd already let her go, but it seemed she hadn't let me go yet. Marina said something about regretting her mistake, but her words didn't matter to me anymore. I silently listened to her monologue, feeling neither anger nor resentment. It was an empty speech. "Goodbye, Marina," I said, interrupting her. "I hope you find what you were looking for." But I was already gone. I dropped the call and turned off the phone. This conversation was the final point I had been missing. Now I could finally close the door to the past and move on with my life. Anna sat next to me, silently watching me. She didn't ask anything, but I knew she understood everything. And in that moment, I realized that there was nothing holding me to the past anymore. Everything I needed was right in front of me. From the moment I dropped that last call from Marina, something inside me had finally changed. It was like a release from a weight I didn't even realize I was carrying. Everything fell into place. My past was left behind, and the future seemed as clean as a fresh sheet of paper. Anna sensed it. She didn't say anything, but her looks, her slight smile, it all spoke for her. We sat on the beach and I knew I didn't need to explain anything. She was someone who just understood, who didn't require extra words. We continued to spend a lot of time together. Day by day I became more and more convinced that this is what real life is supposed to look like: no falsity, no betrayal, no fear. Anna was like a breath of fresh air after years spent in a stuffy room. One evening we were sitting at my house, on the terrace, watching the sun set. It was one of those moments when you don't have to rush anywhere, don't have to think about what will happen tomorrow. We were just enjoying the moment. Anna suddenly turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about the fact that everything that happened to you was for a reason?" I thought about it for a second and then nodded. You know, I used to be angry at myself, at her, at this whole world. I thought that life was unfair, that all these blows of fate were punishment. But now I realize it was a journey. It's hard, it's painful, but it got me here. And it was probably worth it. Anna smiled and held out her hand to me. "I think all of this has made you who you are now. And that's a wonderful thing." We sat holding hands, silently watching the sun disappear over the horizon. This moment was simple and yet very profound at the same time. I felt like everything was finally making sense. However, a few days later, something happened that I didn't expect at all. It was an ordinary weekday. I was minding my own business when suddenly I heard someone knocking on the door. I opened it and on the threshold stood Sergey. Yes, the same Sergey with whom Marina betrayed me. I didn't expect to see him, especially here. He looked nervous, sweaty, as if he had run several kilometers. The first thing I thought was, what is he looking for here? But instead of asking that question out loud, I just stood silently looking at him. Sergey was the first to break the silence. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice trembling. I squinted at him. Talking to him was the last thing I wanted right now. But something in his voice made me let him inside. "Okay, talk," I said coldly, taking a seat on the couch. Sergey sat across from me, staring at the floor. He looked broken, not at all what I'd imagined him to be. All this time I'd thought of him as an enemy, the man who'd ruined my life. But now, looking at him, I saw that his life didn't seem to have turned out the way he'd hoped either. "I don't know how to tell you this," he began, rubbing his hands together nervously. "I made a mistake. I didn't mean for things to turn out this way. Marina left me. She found someone else. I wasn't surprised. In fact, it was only a matter of time." "And what do you want from me?" I asked, trying to keep an indifferent tone. Sergey lowered his head and whispered, "I don't know. Maybe just to apologize. I realize that I hurt you. And I paid for it too." I sat there, listening to him, and felt the anger that had been a part of me a while ago evaporate. I didn't hate him anymore. He too was a victim in this story, though he had played his part. Now I saw before me a man who was probably as broken as I had once been. "Okay," I said finally. "You were wrong. I was wrong. We all make mistakes. But you know what? It's all behind me now. And I don't hold a grudge against you." Sergey looked at me in surprise. He didn't seem to expect that answer. But it was true. Revenge, hatred, it didn't make sense anymore. I'd already been through it. "Thank you," he said quietly and walked away. When the door closed, I suddenly felt completely free of the past. Everything that bound me to Marina, Sergey, and all those old wounds was finally gone. Now there was only a new life, with new people and new feelings. Anna arrived in the evening, as usual. I didn't bother to tell her about Sergey's visit. It wasn't important. All that mattered was that we were together and our life was just beginning. Everything that happened after I met Sergey felt like a new phase of my life, in which the past no longer had any power over me. For the first time in a long time I felt really free. It was a strange but pleasant sensation, as if I had been thrown off my chains. I was no longer attached to pain, to resentment, to that haunting sense of injustice. Anna was becoming an increasingly important part of my existence. We spent a lot of time together, but every time was like something new, as if with her every day could present something amazing. We talked about the future, but without any expectations or promises, just enjoying what we had now. It felt right. One day she suggested we go on a trip. She was always spontaneous, and it was one of those qualities of hers that fascinated me. We decided to go to a small village at the foot of the mountains for a few days. No special plan, just the road, nature, and each other's company. This trip turned out to be a real eye-opener for me. We walked through forests, climbed mountain peaks, sat by the fire in the evenings listening to the wind whispering quietly among the trees. Every day I realized more and more that I had found what I had been looking for so long. Anna wasn't just someone I was comfortable with. She was someone who helped me get back to myself, back to who I was before all this chaos. One night as we sat around the campfire, I suddenly realized that I didn't need to hold on to the past anymore. I looked at her and said, "You know, I thought I would never be able to let go of everything that had happened to me. I was sure it would torment me for the rest of my life. But now I realize that none of that matters." She looked at me with a smile, as if she knew I would say that, "I'm glad you found the strength to let it go. After all, life is too short to waste it on unnecessary things. We all make mistakes, but it's how we deal with them that matters." Her words made me think. Indeed, my whole life up to that point had been filled with fears, doubts, and trying to stay afloat in a turbulent sea of relationships and problems. But now I felt like that was behind me. I was now ready for something new. When we returned from our trip, I already knew for sure that I wanted to move forward. No more regrets, no more looking back on what was. Anna helped me realize that I needed to live in the here and now, not in a past that was long gone. One morning I woke up thinking it was time to step forward. I looked at Anna, who was still sleeping next to me, and felt incredibly warm and grateful for everything she had done for me. I realized I didn't want to waste another minute. We were sitting down to breakfast when I suddenly said to myself, "Anna, I know we haven't discussed this before, but would you want to spend the rest of your life with me? She put the cup aside and looked at me, her eyes rounded with surprise, but I saw warmth in them, not fear. Are you serious? She asked quietly, smiling. Absolutely, I answered, feeling a quiet confidence spill inside me. I can't think of anyone I'd rather go on with than you. Anna looked at me with a gentle smile, her eyes sparkling. She took her time answering, but I didn't need it right away. I knew her answer would come at the right time, because our story, whatever it was just beginning. Anna was silent for a few seconds, smiling that same warm smile she always used to greet my unexpected suggestions. She put her hand on mine and said, I've always thought that there are moments in life that you can't foresee, but they become the most important. And I feel like this is one of them. Her answer sounded like music to my ears. We both realized that life is too unpredictable to make loud promises, but sometimes just being there for each other without requiring any guarantees from the other is enough. We didn't rush into formalities. There were no rings, no loud announcements, no wedding plans. It wasn't what defined our bond. We lived for today, made plans for tomorrow, but didn't put life in rigid boundaries. A few months passed. We continued to live our lives at the same pace, no fuss, no expectations, enjoying every moment we spent together. And every time I looked at Anna, I knew I had made the right decision. One morning she said to me, you know, I think we're ready to start something of our own. I don't mean something big, I just want to take a new step together. What do you mean? I asked, looking at her. I've been thinking about this for a long time. Maybe we could open a little cafe here in our town. Something cozy, where people could come just to sit and relax and talk. I think that would be so nice. I thought about it. The idea was simple, but there was something wonderfully warm about it. Anna had always been a person who saw meaning in simple things, and this idea seemed perfectly natural to me. What could be better than creating a place where we could feel at home and where people could come to share that feeling with us? Let's give it a try, I answered, feeling this decision filling me with a new enthusiasm. And so we started building something of our own. A small cafe in the heart of the town, with wooden tables, cozy chairs and huge windows through which you could admire the sunset. This place became the embodiment of everything we were striving for: tranquility, coziness, simplicity. The cafe became a place where people came not only for coffee, but also for warmth and fellowship. Every day we met new people, listened to their stories, shared our own. It was an amazing time, when every day brought something new, but always within the framework of this cozy world we created together. Sergey and Marina? They remained in the distant past. From time to time I heard from mutual acquaintances that their lives had taken different paths, but it didn't concern me anymore. It was like an old book that you read long ago and put on the shelf, knowing that you would never go back to it. Anna, on the other hand, was the person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. There were no buzzwords, but every moment we spent together spoke more than any promises. We didn't need to validate anything with words, we just lived, and that was enough. One evening, sitting on the porch of our cafe and looking out at the setting sun, I said to her, you know, I never thought I could be happy again after everything that happened. But you showed me that life will always find a way to surprise us. Anna smiled and replied, and I've always believed that the most important thing is not what happens to us, but how we feel about it. You chose to move on, and here we are. We sat in silence, savoring this moment. Everything that was, had brought us here. And now, looking at her smile, I knew I had made the right choice. Life made sense again, and I was grateful for every minute of it. I apologize for any errors in text or voiceover. This story was created and voiced using artificial intelligence, as our team is not native speakers yet, but we are actively learning. Thank you for listening to this story to the end. If you liked it, don't forget to give us a like, subscribe to the channel and press the bell to not miss new exciting stories. We want to hear what you think, leave a comment and share your impressions.